In a developing and breaking news story coming in the last couple of minutes, it is being reported by TMZ Sports and confirmed by other sources that WWE Hall of Famer Hulk Hogan has passed away at the age of 71 years old. As I mentioned, TMZ Sports broke the news with the following report saying, quote, "Wrestling legend Hulk Hogan has died at 71 years old, TMZ Sports has learned." Medics were dispatched to the 71-year-old WWE legend's Clearwater, Florida home early Thursday morning, with operators stating it was regarding a, quote, cardiac arrest. We're told a slew of police cars and EMTs were parked outside Hogan's home, and the icon was carried on a stretcher and into an ambulance. Just a few weeks ago, Hogan's wife Sky denied rumours he was in a coma, stating his heart was, quote, strong as he recovered from surgeries. TMZ says, quote, "We broke the story last month. There were rumblings that Hogan was on his, quote, deathbed, but we were told at the time he was just dealing with the symptoms of a neck procedure he underwent in May." Hulk transformed professional wrestling into a family entertainment sport before Hulk wrestling catered to a fairly narrow audience. Hulk's theatrics in the ring was magnetic for children and their parents, and it supercharged the sport. In 1996, Hulk transformed himself from hero to villain by creating the NWO, New World Order, and became Hollywood Hulk Hogan. It propelled him and professional wrestling to even more fame. Hulk was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2005. He was removed in 2015 after a scandal erupted over racist comments while he was being secretly recorded during a sexual encounter. Gawker posted the clip, and Hulk subsequently sued, winning the lawsuit. Hulk was inducted a second time in the WWE Hall of Fame in 2020, this time as a member of the NWO. As I mentioned, this is a developing story that is just being reported by TMZ Sports and others. Of course, we will have a full tribute video and full reactions from the wider wrestling community later on. But Hogan is probably the most famous pro wrestler who ever lived, and more people paid to see him perform and have seen him perform over the course of his career than probably any other person in history of pro wrestling and probably ever will in pro wrestling. When you talk about Hulk Hogan and when you talk about his legacy and his life, it's complicated. It will always be complicated. There is obviously the discussion about Hogan and his box office draw, the amount of tickets he sold, the amount of merchandise he sold, the amount of people he got for people to watch the World Wrestling Federation in the 1980s, the explosion of the Golden Era, WrestleMania, the first ever WrestleMania pay-per-view being built around him and Mr. T against Rowdy Roddy Piper and Cowboy Bob Orton by his side. Of course, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff as the tag team partner. And even before that, it was the rivalry between Orndorff and Hogan that was really elevating WWE. Vince McMahon picked Hulk Hogan, saw what he was doing in the AWA and said, we need to do that on a bigger scale, put more money into it, bring in his crew, whether it was Bobby the Brain Heenan or Mean Gene Okerlund or any of the talent that Hogan was working with in the AWA. They brought them in and on a national scale went from a regional promotion to a national promotion. And WWE, they competed with the territories. They took over the territories. That was because of the popularity of Hulk Hogan and the money of Vince McMahon. And there is obviously the debate about whether that was good for pro wrestling, whether that was the right thing to do. But one thing can't be argued is the popularity and success if you're going to look at the money that was generated by Hulkamania. And it was a complete into the zeitgeist of life in the 1980s. The first ever wrestler to be on Sports Illustrated, of course, the first ever wrestler to host Saturday Night Live in the build-up to WrestleMania. I mean, the popularity with the Rock and Wrestling Connection, with MTV coming out at the time and Hogan having that look of being the tall, blonde, long hair, tan guy. It was incredibly popular and the success was huge. But as I said, when you talk about his legacy, it'll be one that is complicated. It's also a legacy of stories of backstage politics, going against and turning on people to prevent unionization of pro wrestlers around WrestleMania 2. You then talk about huge successes of WrestleMania 3 in the Pontiac Silverdome, with body slamming Andre the Giant and talking about however many people were in that stadium that date. It's still disputed to this day whether it's 70, 80, 90,000 or even more. And he picked up Andre the Giant and body slammed him, not for the first time, because he had done it a million times before, previously as a heel against a babyface Andre inside Shea Stadium. But people didn't care about that because they were talking about Hulkamania, the babyface, the beloved babyface. And Hogan continued to be on top in WWF throughout the 1980s. But, as I mentioned, with a complicated legacy comes several complicated events, whether it's steroid scandals, Vince McMahon being indicted by the federal government, Hogan being a witness for the prosecution, but then refusing to turn on McMahon and testifying actually, despite being a witness for the prosecution in defense of McMahon. That was really the biggest hammer blow to the government's prosecution of McMahon, and that's why McMahon was acquitted. Then Hogan, of course, he was actually at WCW at the time. He had left WWE in the wake of the steroid scandal, wanted to get away from pro wrestling, and gone back to pro wrestling at a time when Hulkamania was a dead brand and it was on its way down. He goes to WCW, does good business for WCW, but was still doing the tired old red and yellow gimmick and was actually starting to get booed inside the arenas. And Hogan, one thing you can say is he knew the business and he knew pro wrestling, knew it was the right time. He saw Scott Hall and Kevin Nash come in and said, those guys are popular, those guys have got something. I'm, like any wise veteran, going to do, saddle up to them, and I'm going to do what they're doing. I'm going to adapt. I'm going to change to the time. Arguably the greatest heel turn of all time. Bash at the Beach in 1996, the formation of the NWO, and then the business that WCW did on the back of the NWO. Now, again, it's a complicated legacy. And the reason it's a complicated legacy, because even at that time, you're talking about backstage politics, the build to Starrcade in 1997, about the fast count, about how he should have put Sting over. And he did put Sting over in the end, but didn't want to lose. And going to Bischoff, behind the scenes politics and everything else that then came with it. Hogan towards the end of WCW with Vince Russo and Bash at the Beach. Again, it's a complicated legacy. Eventually goes back to WWE in 2002 with the NWO, but actually Hulkamania lives on. He's even more popular than he was before. He becomes the last ever WWF champion before it turned into WWE. But he couldn't stay there very long. By the time 2003, 2004 had come around, he'd fallen out with Vince McMahon again over money, and there were rumors of him going over to TNA Wrestling. Eventually he comes back, goes into the Hall of Fame, has several more matches. And then eventually he does leave WWE, falls out with McMahon again. He ends up in TNA Wrestling at a time where TNA Wrestling was an alternative, something different. People liked it and turned it into something that they didn't even like, and is credited at the time with, along with him, with Eric Bischoff, of putting TNA nearly out of action again, nearly killing off another pro wrestling company. Eventually he makes his way back to WWE as the ambassador, as I mentioned, but then you get into the scandal of his later life with the sex tapes, the racist comments, the lack of an apology as well, the racism scandal and departure. When he was brought back to WWE, there was a situation whereby he felt like, he apologized. He was invited backstage at WWE's Extreme Rules pay-per-view event, and some were not happy that he didn't apologize. He rather just apologized that he was caught, as opposed to apologizing for his words. Again, it's a complicated legacy, so much so that the very last time he appeared on WWE programming was earlier this year in January on the Raw debut on Netflix, accompanied by Jimmy Hart advertising his Real American Beer, and he was in the Intuit Dome in Los Angeles, California, and he was booed out of the building. So again, it's a complicated one. It's a complicated legacy. Hogan has been described as one of the largest attractions in professional wrestling history, and a major reason why Vince McMahon's expansion of his promotion worked. Dave Meltzer stated previously, you can't possibly overrate his significance in the history of the business. He sold more tickets to wrestling shows than any man who ever lived. Hogan's match with Andre the Giant, the main event on February 5th, 1988, holds the American television record for a wrestling audience with a 15.2 Nielsen rating and 33 million viewers. Numbers that aren't even fathomable compared to today's number. In a survey in 2022, Hogan was the most often cited professional wrestler by those in the general public who could even name a professional wrestler. When you name wrestling, you think of Hulk Hogan because he's that much known. But his legacy is a complicated one. People have been critical of his wrestling abilities. People have been critical of his backstage politics. People have been critical of His lies, people have been critical of Hogan warping the truth, lying about certain events. It's become a bit of a comical thing on social media, a meme about Hulk Hogan. So as I've said, it's a very, very, very complicated one. Obviously with his family life, his wife, his 2 children, the incidents involving them. It's a complicated legacy. But certainly one thing cannot be overlooked is the significance and the importance of Hulk Hogan to professional wrestling and what it is today. What we know as pro wrestling today certainly has been shaped by Hulk Hogan. You cannot deny that. Now, of course, as I mentioned, as we get more details on his passing, we'll get more reactions, more videos out. We'll also have a full tribute video as the reaction of the pro wrestling world reacts to the passing of Hulk Hogan at the age of 71 years old. Rest in peace, the Hulkster.